Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Parent Solution, your one stop shop for all things educational. This is episode 21, and today I'm discussing the purpose of discipline and consequences and what role it plays in a child's life, particularly when it comes to fostering a learning environment. So, if you think of discipline as a continual practice, as something that you want to be implementing every day, if you think of discipline as a continual practice of helping a child learn self discipline, then it takes on a bit of a different meaning. I think it's a very powerful statement of both discipline and consequences. This is something that I personally apply to students, and I think that it should be practiced by parents and educators. It's not something that you want to leave to the wayside. I wanted to chat a little bit about what are consequences and why we have them in the first place, as well as what role they play in discipline itself. Then I want to relate the practice of discipline and consequences to how all of that affects learning and a child's desire to keep learning and to further explore the world, particularly as they get older. So first, there's a few key points to remember when it does come to discipline and consequences, whether it is in the home or whether it is at school. One of the most contentious issues, I think, is that of discipline itself. It's not so much whether it should or should not be done, but rather how it should be done and what sort of level of involvement is both acceptable and constructive. Obviously, that varies depending on whether you are a parent or an educator. Something that's acceptable as a parent would not necessarily be acceptable as an educator. I do think that the idea of discipline and consequences being constructive, though, remains similar, whether you are a parent or whether you are an educator. From my personal experience over the years in the educational field, I've worked very closely with various different styles of parenting, as well as numerous children's personalities, of course. So there's some successful patterns and some unsuccessful patterns that I've noticed. But regardless of whether you're a teacher or a parent, I wanted to put together some helpful tips to kind of guide discipline strategies and your choice of consequence. So my first tip would be to communicate expectations and honor your word. So setting up a scenario, a positive scenario for discipline and consequences means that you have to communicate clearly with your child or your student before a situation happens in which those consequences are going to become necessary. So it's not like you're making these things up on the fly. They are clearly set out from the get-go. Because when you explain the repercussions of certain actions in a calm setting and you make sure that they're comprehended, that's just as important as following through with those actions, whatever they might be when the situation arises. Obviously, that varies depending on what has happened and depending on the comfort level and the personal relationship between the two individuals. But creating a strong future relationship, regardless of what relationship you have, means setting and respecting boundaries. A lot of children need a clear structure in order to thrive in an environment, in any environment. Some children don't operate that way. So even if a child doesn't need a clear structure or routine of some sort, you as a parent or educator must honor your word, particularly when it comes to consequences, because doing this sets clear expectations and it allows children to comprehend that their actions set off a chain reaction of dominoes. And whether those are good dominoes or bad ones, the message that you are sending is clear, that certain actions are acceptable while others are not. Regardless of how you as a parent or educator treat discipline or consequences, it's important to remember that your level of integrity is crucial, because when children have clear and consistent expectations in front of them, whether they're academic or otherwise, they're much more capable of rising to meet those expectations than if there were no expectations to start with. My second tip, I think, is one of the most important ones, and it is to make discipline and consequences constructive. So without a doubt, this is, I think, the most important thing to remember when it comes to discipline and consequences, because when you're talking about a child's learning, it's very important to take actions that are going to encourage and foster lifelong learners and not actions that are going to turn them off of learning or stifle their curiosity or discourage them. So one of the ways in which I believe this should be done is through positive reinforcement as a disciplinary measure. An example of something that you could say as a negative reinforcement would be, you must do this because, etc., or else, etc., insert whatever consequences or discipline action there. So it's a you must do this because sort of attitude, as opposed to a positive reinforcement method, which is more along the lines of something you might say, like, why might this be a good option for you to choose? Or what things will you learn or skills will you develop? The fact of the matter is that you can't teach children to behave better by making them feel worse. When children feel better, they're automatically going to behave better. And guess what? They actually learn better too. When you show children the rewards that they can have, whether that's in school or in life, when they do learn well and they do learn consistently, that's fostering that natural desire that children have for learning, that momentum and curiosity that children have that we tend to lose as adults. So tip number 3, and this is my last one that I would say is also important. I believe it's important to involve your children in the process. I really do think, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, I really do think that it's quite amazing the amount of comprehension that children have and their comprehensive abilities when they understand what consequences and discipline mean, when they're properly explained to them. So why not explain those things and involve them in the process of helping to create their own boundaries and guidelines? If children not only know, but they also help to create these methods of discipline and consequences, they're in a much better position than if they had no control over the outcome. And they're more engaged in actually helping to create those sorts of outcomes. When children feel as though they have a say and they realize that they've been given these responsibilities, it's encouraging a positive mindset, a mindset of creativity and self-accountability. And nurturing those traits from a young age is important to developing a lifelong drive to reach their full potential. I do believe that discipline is necessary, but like all good things, everything in moderation, because it really is all about the journey. And even though it might seem like it's important to get it right the first time, remember we're all human and everybody has off days. You do have to pick your battles, but I do think it's important to be consistent about how you show up in this arena in particular. Those are my top 3 suggestions for integrating discipline within a learning or a home environment. I hope you found them helpful or insightful. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tips and tricks on how to keep your child engaged and interested in the learning process.